A packed subway car in Tokyo. A 4-year-old boy drops his toy. His face scrunches up, chest heaving. A public tantrum is seconds away. But his mother doesn't panic. She doesn't yank his arm, count to 3, or offer a bribe. Instead, she catches his eye, gives a slow nod, and places a gentle hand on his shoulder. Instantly, the storm passes. The boy quietly retrieves his toy and sits down. How did she do that? Are Japanese children terrified into submission, or do their parents possess a psychological magic spell? In the West, we constantly battle meltdowns with timeouts, taking away privileges, and raise voices, yet the pushback only gets worse. But here is the unsettling truth most adults never stop to think about. The harder you try to force obedience from the outside, the less a child develops discipline on the inside. Today we are decoding the secret of Japan's invisible discipline, a hidden framework that doesn't rely on punishment, but on a profound internal rewiring that starts long before the meltdown ever happens. The core difference between these two worlds comes down to a fundamental clash in parenting philosophies: reactive versus proactive discipline. In most Western households, discipline is an event that happens after a boundary has been crossed. A child screams and a parent reacts, usually with a timeout, a raised voice, or a strict warning. We are taught to view this misbehavior as an act of defiance that must be quickly extinguished. But here is where the misunderstanding begins. Developmental psychology points to a critical framework known as the locus of control. Studies consistently show that children raised in highly reactive, punishment-heavy environments tend to develop an external locus of control. They learn to behave only when a figure of authority is actively watching or threatening a consequence. Japanese parenting flips this completely. They do not view a tantrum as a rebellion. They see it as a temporarily missing skill. Their ultimate goal is to build an internal locus of control, where a child learns to self-regulate even when no one is looking. But how do you actually achieve that? If you aren't punishing bad behavior, how do you course-correct a child who is actively melting down? The answer isn't a modern psychological trick. It all begins with a single, profound cultural concept that completely redefines what discipline actually means. The concept of Japanese discipline does not start with a list of household rules or a chart of consequences. It begins with a single foundational word: Shitsuke. Shitsuke. In the West, we often equate discipline with correction, a sudden reaction to a broken rule. But the Japanese kanji for Shitsuke tells a completely different story. It is a brilliant combination of two characters: body, shen, and beauty, mei. Together, they do not mean to punish or to bend a child's will. They translate directly to making behavior beautiful. This represents a massive paradigm shift in parenting philosophy. Shitsuke is not a penalty you inflict upon a child. It is a standard of grace you actively model for them. Developmental psychologists refer to this mechanism as observational learning. A child's developing brain is essentially an absorption engine, internalizing how adults handle stress and frustration long before they can comprehend complex moral lectures. Instead of imposing rigid external commands like, "You must sit still or else," Japanese parents focus on demonstrating a shared identity. This is how our family behaves. But here's what most parents don't realize: you cannot verbally mandate emotional regulation. Think about it. How can you possibly teach a young child to stop screaming when you are actively raising your voice to demand quiet? Japanese parents intuitively understand that true discipline requires the adult to master their own nervous system first. They physically model the exact calmness they expect to see. If they want a child to speak softly in a public space, they whisper. If they want a child to handle objects carefully, they place items down with deliberate gentleness. However, modeling good behavior is only the outer shell of the system. What happens when a child actually acts out, breaks a boundary, and disrupts the peace of others? Japanese parents do not simply say, "You are being bad." To handle active conflict, they deploy a much deeper psychological tool. When a child acts out, Japanese parents do not simply label the behavior as bad or naughty. Instead, they deploy a profound psychological tool known as Omoiyari, CERI. While it roughly translates to deep empathy or consideration for others, In the realm of child development, it acts as the emotional engine for self-control. When you punish a child with a harsh reprimand or a timeout, you immediately activate their amygdala, the brain's primitive fear and survival center. The child might stop the unwanted behavior out of sheer self-preservation, but they learn absolutely nothing about why the action was actually wrong. Omoiyari, on the other hand, intentionally engages the prefrontal cortex. It builds a child's theory of mind, which is the cognitive ability to recognize that other people, and even inanimate objects, possess feelings and perspectives different from their own. Consider a classic toddler scenario. Throwing objects. A Western parent will typically react by saying, "Stop throwing your toys. You are breaking the rules." The focus is entirely on the child's infraction and the parent's authority. A Japanese parent, however, will often pick up the toy and softly say, "Ouch, the block is crying because you threw it so hard." If they are on public transit, they will not say, "Be quiet or you are in trouble." They will say, "The train driver will be sad if we make too much noise." This subtle shift in language completely alters the psychological weight of the moment. Discipline is no longer about forcing obedience to avoid the wrath of an adult. It becomes about recognizing their personal impact on the world around them. But here is where the situation gets complicated and where many parents hit a wall. What happens if a toddler is highly dysregulated, completely stubborn, and simply does not care if a plastic block is crying? Empathy alone cannot stop a full-blown meltdown once it starts. The truth is, empathy cannot thrive in a chaotic environment. It requires a rigid structural container, a predictable rhythm that keeps the nervous system grounded before a crisis ever begins. And this is exactly where most people profoundly misunderstand how Japanese children become so remarkably disciplined. Empathy cannot thrive in a chaotic environment. It requires a predictable rhythm, which brings us to a concept deeply woven into the fabric of Japanese society: Kata, Shing. Translating to form, pattern, or ritual, Kata is the structural foundation of Japanese discipline. In the West, we often treat daily household tasks as battlegrounds. Parents negotiate, remind, and threaten. If you don't put your toys away, you can't watch television. Responsibilities are frequently framed as burdens, obligations, or even punishments for bad behavior. Japan approaches this entirely differently. From a very young age, children participate in osoji, the daily ritual of cleaning their own classrooms and school grounds. It is never used as a penalty. It is simply kata. It is just the rhythm of life. But what looks like a rigid, strict routine on the surface is actually doing something much deeper to a child's developing brain. Developmental psychology heavily emphasizes the importance of environmental predictability. A child's nervous system feels the safest and least defensive when it knows exactly what is coming next. By embedding responsibilities into fixed, non-negotiable rituals, like taking off shoes at the entryway, washing hands immediately, and placing items in specific spaces, Japanese parents drastically reduce a psychological trigger known as decision fatigue. Think about your own household for a moment. Have you ever noticed that the most explosive tantrums almost always happen during transitions? When a child is abruptly told to stop playing and go to bed, their brain perceives the sudden demand as a threat to their autonomy. But when a transition is an established, predictable kata, the resistance naturally fades. You are no longer the bad guy issuing an arbitrary command. You are simply guiding them through the quiet, established rhythm of the day. To apply this, stop giving isolated orders that invite pushback and start building tiny, unbreakable sequences. However, creating a calm rhythm inside the safety of your home is one thing. To make Shitsuke, Omoiyari, and Kata work flawlessly in the unpredictable chaos of public spaces, there is one ultimate psychological skill adults must master before they even step out the front door. To make Shitsuke, Omoiyari, and Kata work flawlessly in the unpredictable chaos of public spaces, there is one ultimate psychological skill adults must master before they even step out the front door: anticipation, or the art of pre-framing. Let's go back to that mother on the crowded Tokyo subway from the beginning. She didn't look panicked when her son dropped his toy because she wasn't relying on a magic trick in that exact moment. She was perfectly calm because she had already done the heavy lifting before they ever boarded the train. Developmental psychologists refer to this concept as scaffolding. A young child's nervous system is incredibly fragile when shifting between different environments. They simply cannot regulate their emotions if they are thrust into a new, overwhelming situation without knowing what to expect. In Western cultures, parents frequently drag a tired or hungry toddler into a bright, noisy supermarket and then act surprised and angry when a meltdown inevitably happens. We expect the child to adapt on the fly. Japanese parents, however, meticulously pre-frame the experience. Before leaving the house, a parent will kneel to their child's eye level and set the psychological stage. We are going to ride the train now. It will be very crowded and many people will be resting. Because of that, we will use our whisper voices and keep our hands in our laps. They provide the script before the child ever walks onto the stage. By giving the brain a predictable map of the immediate future, they eliminate the shock of transition and prevent the emotional escalation that leads to tantrums. This is the piece of the puzzle that changes everything. Discipline is not about how loudly you react when the storm hits. It is about how carefully you fortify the house while the sun is still shining. And that brings us to the final unspoken truth about the journey of raising a truly calm child. The secret to the famously calm children of Japan is not an iron fist, and it certainly isn't magic. It is a profound psychological shift in how adults view their role in a child's development. By embracing Shitsuke, parents stop demanding blind obedience and start modeling beautiful behavior. Through Omoiyari, they replace fear-based punishment with deep empathy, teaching children to understand their impact on the world. And by establishing the predictable rhythms of Kata, paired with the proactive power of anticipation, they eliminate the chaotic transitions that trigger meltdowns in the first place. But here's the crucial mindset shift you must make today. Children do not throw tantrums to intentionally anger you. A meltdown is not an act of defiance, it is a distress signal. They are experiencing massive emotions in an underdeveloped brain, and they simply need to borrow your calm nervous system to regulate their own. True discipline is a steady rhythm, not a loud reaction. Tonight, instead of reacting when your child acts out, try implementing just one predictable ritual, a tiny kata, and observe how the dynamic shifts. Share your experience in the comments below and subscribe for more deep dives into child psychology. Before you try this, however, there is one final, critical consideration you must keep in mind. Thank you so much for exploring these concepts with us today. If this deep dive into Japanese parenting gave you a new perspective on your child's behavior, please leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. We would love to hear which of these invisible disciplines you plan to try first. As a quick reminder, while this video explores cultural philosophies and developmental psychology, it is meant for educational purposes only. It does not replace professional medical, psychological, or specialized educational advice. Always consult with a qualified professional regarding specific concerns about your child's unique developmental needs.